Get off my porch, Eddie.
He's not yours anymore.
Move, Greg. It's been the year. I'm taking my son home. You're not taking anything. Read this. I filed for permanent guardianship. It's as good as done. You're nothing to him now. We shook hands. 1 year, Greg, 1 hard year, and I get him back. I've got a job. I've got his room painted. Leo, it's Dad, I'm here. Don't you call for him. I told you, he's not seeing you today.
Dad?
Leo! You put your hands on my kid one more time.
Your kid? Tell him, Leo. Tell your dad what you told me. Come on.
The boy's lips shook. You left? You didn't even write me. Uncle Greg said you weren't ever coming back. The words hit Eddie harder than the door had. I wrote you every week. 52 letters, Leo. I swear on your mother. There were no letters. Greg's voice went flat and final. Nobody wrote him anything. Go home, Eddie, before I call the police on you too. Marcy? Marcy? You saw me mail them. Tell him. But the door was already swinging shut, the last inch of his son's face disappearing behind it. And then the deadbolt turned with a sound like a gunshot, and a father stood alone on a welcome mat, scattered with the pages of a court order, pounding both fists on a door that used to open for him, screaming a little boy's name into the wood until his voice gave out. That is where it begins. On a locked porch, with a father on the wrong side of a door and a best friend of 15 years on the other, holding a court paper and a boy who had been taught to call him something he wasn't. Eddie Dolan was 36 years old, and 18 months earlier he had been an ordinary, happy man with an ordinary good life. A wife named Jenna, a boy named Leo, a job cooking the line at a diner that had been on the same corner for 30 years. Then Jenna got sick, the fast kind of sick, and she was gone in 5 months, and she left behind a hole in the middle of everything and a stack of medical bills that no line cook's wages were ever going to close. Eddie tried. God, he tried. But grief is expensive in ways nobody warns you about, and he missed shifts. And then the diner closed for good when the block got bought up. And then he was a widower with no job and a mountain of debt and a lease he could not make. And one cold morning, he and Leo woke up in the back of his car in a grocery store parking lot, and Leo asked if this was their house now. That was the morning Eddie made the hardest and best decision of his life, and it was the one they would use against him. He called his oldest friend. Greg Tanner had been in Eddie's life for 15 years, since they were 2 broke line cooks at the same steakhouse. And somewhere along the way, brother had stopped being a figure of speech between them. Greg had been the best man at Eddie's wedding. Greg had sat in the hospital hallway the night Jenna died, and had been a pallbearer at her funeral, and had said with his hand on Eddie's shoulder at the graveside that whatever Eddie ever needed, for the rest of their lives, all he had to do was ask. Eddie had believed him, because you believe the man who carried your wife's casket. That was the thing that would take Eddie the longest to understand later. Longer than the letters, longer than the money. Not that a stranger had robbed him, that the one man he'd trusted enough to hand his son to was the one who'd been counting the whole time. Greg Tanner had a house, a wife, a spare room, and no kids of his own after years of trying. Eddie asked him to take Leo, just for a while, just until he could get straight, get a job, get a roof, so the boy would have a bed and stay in his same school with his same friends instead of living out of a Honda. Greg said, "Of course, brother, as long as you need," and Eddie signed a temporary guardianship at a notary's counter with his hands shaking. And he told his son it was an adventure, a sleepover that would last a little while, and that Dad would write every week and come back the second he could stand on his own 2 feet. He kept every part of that promise. He worked 2 kitchens, doubles, saved every dollar, clawed his way into a small, clean apartment with a bedroom he painted himself, and a twin bed with a blue comforter because blue was Leo's favorite. And every Sunday, without fail, no matter how tired, he wrote his son a letter. He drew little cartoons in the margins. He numbered them, so Leo would know none were missing. 52 letters, a year of a father's heart in cheap envelopes. Leo never saw a single one, and Eddie was about to find out why. The letters had been the thing that kept him alive that year, though he would not have put it that way. He wrote the first one the same night he handed his son over, parked under a sodium light behind the grocery store, a cheap notebook against the steering wheel, and he cried the whole way through it, and then wiped the paper dry so the ink wouldn't smear, and Leo wouldn't know. He told his son it was an adventure. He told him Dad was coming back. He drew the dog, then he mailed it in the morning on his way to look for work, and he made himself a promise on the walk to the mailbox. One every Sunday, no matter what, until the day I bring him home. He kept it through everything. He wrote one from a break room floor between shifts at 2 different restaurants, trading sleep for 20 minutes of his son. And the night he finished painting the apartment's little bedroom blue as a summer sky, he wrote another and taped a paint chip inside the envelope so Leo could see the exact color of the room that was waiting for him. Every Sunday, 52 times, a tired man reached across a city to a boy he wasn't allowed to call and said the same true thing 100 different ways. I did not leave you. I am coming back. This is almost over. He never got an answer. Not once. And he told himself that was because Leo was 8, and 8-year-olds don't write back, and he kept going. It never once occurred to him that the silence was manufactured, that his son was in a house a few miles away, being told every week that his father hadn't so much as sent a postcard. Eddie was too honest a man to imagine that kind of patience in a lie. The first hearing was a slaughter, and Eddie walked into it alone because he could not afford a lawyer, which was the whole problem in a single sentence. He stood in front of a judge in his one clean shirt and tried to explain that the guardianship was only ever meant to be temporary, and across the aisle sat Greg Tanner in a pressed jacket beside his wife, in front of a lawyer they had paid for. And the story the lawyer told was smooth and terrible. Here was a man, the lawyer said gently, who had signed his own child away a year ago and only now reappeared, a man with a history of instability, unemployment, homelessness. Here, by contrast, was a stable married couple who had given the boy a home, a routine, a yard, love. Was the court really going to tear a happy, settled 8-year-old out of the only stable home he had known, to hand him to a father who had, by his own signature, given him up? Eddie said he wrote letters. The lawyer said there were no letters in evidence, and asked, not unkindly, whether Mr. Dolan had any proof of any contact at all in the past year. Eddie did not, because he had mailed the only copies to the very house that was now saying they never came. The judge, tired and cautious, did the cautious thing. She left Leo where he was, kept the temporary order in place, pending a full hearing, and granted Eddie 2 supervised hours a week at Fenwick Park by the duck pond, with a court monitor sitting a bench away to see the son he had gone hungry for a year to come back to. 2 hours a week. A man who had been that boy's whole world for 8 years was now allowed 120 minutes of him at a time, on a picnic table near a playground, with a stranger watching over a coffee, and had to be grateful for it, because the alternative was nothing. Eddie was early to every single one. He was always already sitting at the table when Leo was walked over, whether the boy came willingly or not, because if there was one thing Eddie Dolan understood in his bones, after the year he'd had, it was that being there is the whole job, and it does not stop being the job just because being there has been rationed down to 2 hours at a picnic table under someone else's watch. He sat in his car afterward, in a different parking lot than the one where it all began, but the same kind of low. And he did not know how he was going to fight people with money and a nicer house and a year's head start on a lie. And then a woman knocked on his window, and it turned out someone had been in that courtroom who saw exactly what had happened. Her name was Nadine Barrett, and she was a legal aid attorney, which meant she carried 100 cases for people the system was busy chewing up, and she did it for a salary that was almost an insult. She had been in the gallery on another matter and had watched Eddie lose. and something about it had made her stay. She took his case for free that afternoon, over coffee he could barely pay for, and the first thing she did was tell him the truth about the ground he was standing on. "Listen to me, because this is the most important thing I'll say," Nadine told him. "You are his father. You are, as far as this law is concerned, a fit parent, and a fit parent has a constitutional right to raise his own child. A guardian, even a good one, even one the kid loves, does not get to keep a child away from a fit parent just because the guardian's house is nicer. That's not how it works. The Constitution is actually on your side here, which almost never happens for people like my clients." She let that land, then leaned in. "But here's the trap they've built, and it's a good one. The one thing that beats a parent's rights is abandonment. If Greg can convince a judge you abandoned Leo, that you signed him over and vanished, and didn't contact him for a year, then the story flips, and you become the man who threw his kid away and came back when it was convenient. And right now, on paper, that is exactly what you look like. Because the only evidence of the year you spent fighting your way back to him is 52 letters that only exist inside a house that swears they never arrived. So it's my word against his," Eddie said. "Right now, yes. And his word comes with a mortgage and a lawyer and a wife nodding along, and yours comes with a car you slept in." Nadine closed her folder. "So we are not going to win this on your word. We are going to find those letters, or we're going to prove what happened to them, because a man who mailed his son 52 letters is not a man who abandoned anybody. And somewhere in that nice house, somebody knows that." She paused. "Tell me about the wife. Tell me about Marcy." Before Eddie could answer that, he had his first supervised visit, and it broke something in him that the courtroom hadn't touched. Leo was walked across the grass to the picnic table and would not run to him, would not even come close, sat down at the far end of the bench with the monitor watching from a few yards off, and looked at his father like a child looks at a man he has been taught to be afraid of. "Hey," Eddie said, soft, the way you approach a spooked animal. "Hey, Leo, I missed you so much. You got taller. Uncle Greg says you only came back because you want money." The words were not an 8-year-old's words. Eddie heard the man in them, the sentences a child repeats without understanding, and it took everything he had to keep his voice even. "That's not true. Not one bit of it. I came back because I love you, and because I promised I would. And I keep my promises to you. Did you get my letters?" "You didn't write me any letters." Leo's chin trembled, the old Leo flickering under the coached one. "You left. You didn't call. Uncle Greg said if you really wanted me, you'd have called, and you never called, so..." And there it was, the shape of the whole crime. Eddie had been told by Greg, back at the beginning, that phone calls upset the boy during the adjustment, that it was better to just write for a while. So Eddie had written, faithfully, and Greg had pocketed every letter and then told the child that a father who loved him would have called. He had built the abandonment out of Eddie's own obedience. He had used Eddie's trust as the brick and Eddie's love as the mortar. "I wrote you every single Sunday," Eddie said, and he made himself smile even as his eyes burned. 52 times. "I drew you those dumb comics you like, the dog ones. And one day you're going to read every one of them, and you're going to know your dad never, ever left you. Okay? You don't have to believe me yet, but you will." Leo didn't answer. But something in his face, some crack in the story he'd been fed, stayed with Eddie the whole drive home, and it was the only thing that kept him upright. At the next visit, Eddie brought paper and a marker to the picnic table, and he didn't push, didn't plead his case, just sat down and started drawing one of the dumb dog cartoons while Leo watched from the far end of the bench, pretending not to. After a while, without looking up, Leo said his old dog drawings used to be funnier, and Eddie laughed, a real laugh, the first one in a long time, and said he was out of practice, but he'd been doing a lot of them lately, more than Leo knew. Leo didn't ask what that meant, but when the monitor said time was up, The boy hesitated getting off the bench, and he took the little dog drawing with him, folded it, and put it in his pocket. And he did not say why, and he did not have to. It was not much. It was a hairline crack in a year of concrete, but Eddie drove home that day and cried in the good way for the first time since it started, because his son had kept the drawing, and a child does not keep the drawings of a father he truly believes abandoned him. Nadine, meanwhile, was pulling on the threads, and every one of them led somewhere uglier. This was not, she found, a simple case of a friend who'd grown too attached. Greg Tanner had been busy. When Jenna died, she had left one thing behind besides debt, a small life insurance policy, $85,000, and because Leo was a minor, it had been paid into a custodial account that only his legal guardian could touch. As Leo's guardian, Greg had been touching it. He had drained more than half of it already, a few thousand at a time, remodeling projects and a new truck and vague withdrawals, spending a dead mother's last gift to her son on himself while the boy ate cereal for dinner. And the permanent guardianship petition had not been filed in a panic. It had been prepared for months by a real lawyer, timed to land the exact week Eddie came back, so that the moment Eddie tried to reclaim his son, the paperwork would already be waiting to call him the intruder. He didn't drift into this, Nadine said, laying it out on her desk. He built it. He told you not to call, so the only contact you had was letters. Then he made the letters disappear. Then he told your son you never reached out. He's spending your dead wife's life insurance on a new truck while your son eats cereal, and he timed the whole legal move to the day you'd come knocking. Eddie, a man doesn't accidentally do all of that. Loving the kid might be real, but everything he built on top of that love was designed, brick by brick, to erase you. The cruelest thefts don't come from strangers who hate you. They come from people who smile, who call you brother, who take what's yours while telling the world, and even telling themselves that they're only doing what's best. Somewhere out there, a good person is being told that accepting help once means they forfeited the thing they love. Before you scroll past, send this to the friend who carried you through your worst year and never once tried to keep what they carried. There was a truth under Greg's crime that made it sadder without making it any smaller. He had wanted to be a father as long as Marcy had wanted to be a mother, had lived through the same 11 years of hope and blood tests and empty rooms, had learned to stop looking in the windows of houses with swing sets. And then Eddie's whole world had collapsed and set a real, living, gap-toothed boy down in his spare bedroom. And for the first time in his life, Greg Tanner got to be somebody's dad. Got to coach the t-ball and pack the lunches and hear a kid call him a name he'd given up ever being called. That longing was real. It might have been the most real thing about him. But a wound is a reason, not a permission. And Greg had taken his oldest ache and used it to justify erasing another man whose only crime was having loved the same child first. The saddest kind of villain is the one who had a true grief and decided to cure it by manufacturing a deeper one in somebody else. But a scheme built by two people has a seam, and the seam in this one was named Marcy. Because Marcy Tanner had wanted a child more than she had ever wanted anything, had grieved through years of trying and failing, and had let herself be talked into a wrong she could not fully look at, because loving Leo felt so much like being the mother she'd never gotten to be. She had gone along with it. But Marcy was the one who did the laundry and cleaned the rooms and handled the mail. And every Sunday for a year, a letter had come to her house addressed in Eddie's careful hand to a little boy, and her husband had told her to throw them away. And Marcy Tanner had looked at those 52 envelopes, a father's whole year of not giving up, and she had not been able to make her hands drop a single one into the trash. Greg felt the ground shifting the way guilty men do, and he moved to lock everything down before it could move further. He pushed his lawyer to fast-track the permanent guardianship and to open an adoption case on top of it, so that Leo would be legally, permanently theirs before any full hearing could weigh Eddie's side. And then he came to see Eddie himself, which was its own kind of tell, and he brought the voice he used on everyone, warm and reasonable, and utterly certain he was the good guy. "I'm not your enemy, Eddie. I never was." Greg sat across from him at a gas station coffee counter, a man who owned a house talking down to a man who owned a car. Think about what a trial does to him. Lawyers asking a scared kid who he wants to live with. Him hearing about the parking lot, about you signing him over. "You want to put Leo through that?" "Because I don't." He slid a proposal across the counter. "Here's what a good father does. You let us keep raising him where he's settled, and I'll give you real visitation, holidays, some weekends, supervised at first. You stay in his life. Nobody drags him through a courtroom. Everybody wins, and the kid doesn't get torn in half." It was a masterpiece, and Eddie knew it, because every word was aimed at the exact place a loving father is softest. For one long night, he sat with it in his apartment, in the little blue room he'd painted for a boy who wasn't in it, and he almost said yes, not because it was fair, because he was tired, and broke, and outgunned, and because a small poison voice told him that maybe Leo really was better off in the yard with the two calm people, that maybe the most loving thing a poor man could do was step back and take the holidays and be grateful. That is the lie the whole system had been whispering at him since the first hearing, that the man who can offer a yard has more right to a child than the man who would crawl across broken glass for him. And for one night, it nearly won. Then he thought about the 52 letters he'd mailed into a silence he still didn't understand. A whole year of Sundays gone somewhere he couldn't prove. And he heard his own voice back at that picnic table. "You're going to read every one of them, and you're going to know your dad never left." He could not teach his son that showing up matters and then fail to show up for the biggest fight of both their lives. "No," Eddie told Greg the next morning on the phone before he could lose his nerve. "I'm not taking your holidays. He's my son. I didn't spend a year clawing back to him to settle for being his visitor. We're going to court." "Then you're going to lose him for good," Greg said, and the warmth was finally gone, and under it was the thing that had been there all along. "And when you do, remember you had a clean way out, and you chose to make him watch." The night Greg told her to burn them, Marcy took the shoebox out to the backyard fire pit and sat with it in her lap for a long time. She was not a cruel woman. That was the thing she kept having to face, sitting there in the cold. She was not cruel, and yet she had helped do a cruel thing. One small, allowed silence at a time, because loving Leo had filled a hole in her that 11 years of empty rooms and negative tests had carved out. And she had let that hunger talk her out of asking the questions she already knew the answers to. She lifted the lid. She took out the top letter, number 52, the most recent one. And by the porch light, she read a few lines of it, a father telling his son the blue room was finished, that there was a bed with his name on it, that it was almost time. Hang on. And Marcy Tanner sat by a cold fire pit and understood that if she struck a match, she would not just be burning paper. She would be burning the only proof that a good man had loved his child every week of the worst year of his life, so that her husband could keep the child and the insurance money and the story. She thought about the mother she had always wanted to be. And she knew, with a clarity that frightened her, that the mother she wanted to be could not light that fire, because a real mother protects a child's truth even when the truth costs her everything she thought she wanted. She carried the box back inside and hid it where Greg would not look. And in the morning, when he asked, she looked her husband in the eye and told him it was done, that she'd burned every last one of them in the pit the night before. He believed her without a second thought, because it had never once occurred to him that his own wife might not be on his side. That lie was the most important thing Marcy Tanner ever did, because it meant that when Greg walked into a courtroom weeks later, he would swear there had never been any letters with the total, unguarded confidence of a man who thought the evidence was ash. Then she lay awake the rest of that night, and the next morning, she found the number of the legal aid lawyer. What Greg did not know was that his own house had already turned against him. Marcy Tanner had gone to the legal aid office herself the morning after the cold fire pit, with a shoebox on her knees. She was terrified because she understood exactly what she was about to spend. Testifying against Greg meant the end of her marriage, and it meant giving up with her own hands the boy she had let herself love like a son. Nadine did not push her. She only asked, quietly, whether Marcy understood that the 52 envelopes on her lap were the difference between a father getting his child back and a father losing him forever. Marcy said she understood, and she set the box on the lawyer's desk, all 52 in order, and said she would take the stand and tell the whole truth, whatever it cost to her, because she had spent 11 years aching to be a mother, and had finally learned that being one had nothing to do with keeping a child, and everything to do with protecting his truth. Nadine did one more thing before the hearing, and it mattered more than Eddie realized at the time. She got the court to appoint a child psychologist to evaluate Leo, a neutral one, not paid by either side. The woman spent 3 sessions with the boy, and what she wrote in her report was careful and clinical and quietly damning. Leo, she found, showed the specific markers of a coached child, a rehearsed rejection of his father that did not match his underlying attachment, phrases about money and abandonment that were plainly an adult's words in a child's mouth, and a deep confusion underneath it all, a boy who had clearly once loved and trusted the very father he was now reciting lines even against. Children who are genuinely neglected, the psychologist noted, do not fold a parent's drawing and hide it in their pocket. Leo's behavior was not the behavior of an abandoned child. It was the behavior of a child who had been told a story that his own heart kept contradicting. The report did not decide the case, but it put a professional's signature on the thing Eddie had felt in that visitation room, that his son was in there, under the coaching, waiting to be told the truth. "We're going to let him make his whole case," Nadine told Eddie the night before the hearing. "Let Greg stand up and swear you abandoned Leo. Let his lawyer paint you as the deadbeat who came crawling back. Let them build the whole thing on you, never once reaching out." She almost smiled, the tired, dangerous smile of someone who has finally been handed the truth. "And then we're going to open a shoebox." The hearing was held in a family courtroom with fluorescent light and a box of tissues on the witness rail that had clearly been used many times before. Greg's lawyer went first, and he was polished, and he did exactly what Nadine had wanted him to do, which was to commit, completely and on the record, to the story of a father who had thrown his son away. He put Greg on the stand, and Greg was good, better than good. A man who had told this story to himself so many times he believed it. He testified that Eddie had signed Leo over and disappeared, that in a full year there had been no calls, no cards, no contact of any kind, that he and his wife had stepped up out of love to raise an abandoned child, and that the boy was thriving, settled, bonded, and that he now, tragically, was frightened of the father who had left him. The lawyer asked for the record clearly, so there could be no mistake. In the entire year, did Mr. Dolan ever once attempt to contact his son? And Greg looked the judge in the eye and said, "No, not once. He never reached out at all." He said it because he believed the proof was gone. He had told his wife to burn it. He did not know his wife was sitting in the second row. Then Greg's lawyer did the thing Eddie had been dreading most, the thing that nearly ended it before the shoebox ever opened. He asked the court to consider the child's own wishes, and the judge, as judges do, agreed to speak with Leo privately, in chambers with only the lawyers and a guardian ad litem present. And Leo, 8 years old, sitting in a big leather chair with his feet not touching the floor, said the words a year of quiet coaching had put in his mouth. He said he wanted to stay with Uncle Greg and Aunt Marcy. He said his dad had left him and only came back to cause trouble. He said it in the flat, over-rehearsed way of a child reciting something an adult needs him to believe. But he said it, and the guardian ad litem wrote it down, and when they came back into the courtroom, Eddie could see it on the judge's face, the way the scale had tipped, the terrible logic of it. The boy wants to stay. The couple is stable. Why would the court traumatize a settled child to satisfy a father who signed him away? For a few minutes in that courtroom, Eddie Dolan lost his son. He could feel it happening, could feel the room settling toward the comfortable answer. And he sat there with his lawyer's hand on his arm and understood that everything now hung on whether a frightened woman in the second row would do the bravest thing of her life. His whole year, his 52 Sundays, his son's entire future, all of it balanced on Marcy Tanner in a shoebox, and there was nothing left for Eddie to do but keep breathing and trust that love, real love, would not be able to keep quiet. Then it was Nadine's turn, and she built the floor back under Eddie one board at a time. She entered his lease, his pay stubs, a year of double shifts, photographs of a small, clean bedroom, painted blue, with a maid bed waiting in it. She established plainly what the law required a court to remember, that Eddie Dolan was a fit parent, that fitness was not measured by the size of a man's house, and that a fit father has a right to his child, that a guardian's comfort cannot override. She made the room see a man who had not vanished, but had spent a brutal year fighting his way back to a promise. And then she said that defense would call one witness, and she called Marcy Tanner, and Greg's head turned so fast it was almost audible. Marcy walked to the stand with a shoebox in her hands, and she did not look at her husband, because if she had looked at him, she might not have been able to do it. She was sworn. Nadine asked her, gently, whether any letters had ever come to the house for Leo, from his father, in the year he'd lived there. Every week, Marcy said, and her voice shook but did not stop. One every Sunday. For a year, 52 of them. Eddie wrote his son every single week. She set the shoebox on the rail. My husband told me to throw them away. I couldn't. And last week he told me to burn them. And that was when I understood what we'd done. She finally looked at Greg, and it was the look of a marriage ending. So I kept them, every one, in order. The courtroom did not make a sound. Nadine opened the box in front of the judge and lifted out the letters, thick as a brick. Each envelope numbered in the corner in a father's careful hand, 1 through 52, none missing, everyone postmarked, everyone addressed to Leo Dolan at the Tanner's address, everyone unopened because the boy they were written to had never been allowed to hold a single one. A year of a father's heart, sealed and stacked, the physical proof of the exact opposite of everything Greg had just sworn under oath. Nadine asked the court's permission to read only the first one, the one postmarked the week it all began. She read it quietly. It was short. In it, a father told his 8-year-old son that he was writing this from the front seat of the car, that he was sorry, that none of this was Leo's fault, that Dad was going to work harder than he'd ever worked so he could come back and make a real home, that he would write every Sunday so Leo would always know exactly where his heart was, and that no matter what anyone ever said, Leo should remember one thing: your dad did not leave you. Your dad is coming back. And at the bottom he had drawn a small cartoon dog, because Leo loved the dog ones. Greg's lawyer did not cross-examine, because there is no question you can ask a shoebox. Greg sat very still, a man watching a story he'd almost gotten away with collapse into what it had always actually been. And the judge, who had walked in that morning half inclined to leave a settled child in a stable home, now understood that the stability had been built on a lie in a locked mailbox and a dead mother's stolen insurance, and her whole face had changed. The judge asked Eddie if there was anything he wanted to say. He stood, and he did not have a lawyer's words, so he used his own. When I signed my son over, everybody in my life told me I was doing the right thing, the responsible thing, keeping him off the street, Eddie said. And the second I needed help, that same choice got turned into proof I didn't deserve him. I've spent a year now, learning that when you're poor and you fall, people don't see a man doing his best. They see a man they can take things from. His voice was steady. I slept in a car so my boy wouldn't have to. I worked 2 kitchens so I could build him a room. And every single Sunday, no matter how bad it got, I wrote him a letter because I needed him to know that whatever anyone told him, his dad did not leave. I'm not the man with the nicer house. I never will be. But I'm the man who wrote 52 letters to a mailbox that wouldn't open, and I would write 52,000 more. That's not what abandoning your child looks like. That's the opposite of it. Please, give me back my son. The room was very quiet when he finished, and the box of tissues on the witness rail was, for once, being used by people who worked in that courtroom every day and had thought they'd seen everything. She ruled from the bench. She found that Eddie Dolan had never abandoned his son, that the evidence proved continuous, faithful contact deliberately concealed by the guardian, and that a fit father's rights could not be overridden by a guardianship obtained and maintained through deception. She terminated the guardianship. She ordered Leo returned to his father. She referred Greg Tanner's draining of the boy's life insurance and his concealment of the letters to the appropriate authorities, because spending a dead woman's last gift to her son while erasing the boy's living father is not love. Whatever a man tells himself in the mirror, and it has other names in a courtroom. Greg Tanner walked out having lost the boy, the money, and the wife, all in one morning, and the only one of the 3 he'd ever had any right to was the wife. And he'd spent her too. But the ruling was not the moment that mattered. The moment that mattered came after, in the hallway, when a caseworker brought Leo out, and the boy stood there confused and small in the middle of a day too big for him. And Eddie knelt down and did not grab him, just held out the shoebox. "These are yours," Eddie said, 52 of them. 1 for every week. I told you I'd write, and I did, and somebody kept them from you, and that wasn't your fault." His voice broke all of the way now, no reason left to hold it. "You don't have to come to me till you're ready, but read one, anyone, and you'll know I never left." Leo took the box. He opened it with the careful hands of a child who has been lied to and is learning to check for himself. And he pulled out the letter, numbered 1. And he read his father's promise from the front seat of a cold car. And he saw the little cartoon dog, and something a year of coaching had built came apart all at once. He looked up at the man he'd been taught to fear, and the coach voice was gone. And it was just Leo, 8 years old, who whispered the only word that had ever mattered. "Dad?" "Yeah," Eddie said, and gathered his son up off that hallway floor. And this time, nobody in the world had the standing to pull him loose. "Yeah, it's me. I've got you. I've got you." Winning Leo back in a courtroom turned out to be the easy part. A year of being told your father left you does not undo itself in an afternoon, and there were hard nights. Nights Leo woke up not sure which house he was in. Nights he was angry at Eddie for a year that hadn't been Eddie's fault. Nights he missed the yard and the 2 calm people and felt guilty for missing them. Eddie did not rush any of it. He had learned the hard way that being a father is not a thing you win once in a courtroom. It's the 10,000 ordinary nights after, the showing up over and over until a child's body remembers before his mind does that this is the one who stays. There was a night, a few weeks in, when Leo screamed at him that he wanted to go back to Uncle Greg's, that he hated the small apartment, that Eddie had ruined everything, and he threw the plate of dinner Eddie had cooked onto the floor. A weaker or a more tired man might have taken it personally, might have snapped, might have heard rejection in it. Eddie heard a hurt 8-year-old who had been lied to by 2 men he loved and had no safe place to put the anger except at the one who would never leave. So Eddie did not yell. He got down on the kitchen floor and started cleaning up the broken plate, calmly. And after a minute, Leo slid down next to him and started helping, crying now instead of screaming. And then he was in his father's lap on the linoleum, and Eddie held him and said the thing he would say 1,000 more times in the years to come. "You can be as mad as you need to be. I'm not going anywhere. You can throw every plate in this kitchen. I will still be right here in the morning making you breakfast. That's the difference now, Leo. I'm the one who stays." They sat on the floor a long time, and something in the boy that had been clenched for a year began, slowly, to unclench. He hung the letters on the wall, all 52 of them, in order, 1 through 52, across the wall of the little blue room, so that the first thing Leo saw every morning was a year of Sundays his father had never skipped. Some evenings the boy read them again, slowly, the whole year of them, and he would find his dad in the doorway watching, and neither of them needed to say anything, because the letters said all of it, had been saying it the whole time, to a mailbox that wouldn't open. On a Sunday that first month home, Eddie took Leo to visit Jenna, the two of them standing over her stone in the wind, and Eddie told his son the part he was old enough now to hear, that the money Uncle Greg had been taking was the insurance Leo's mom had left behind for him, money meant for Leo's own future, and that a man had spent it on himself while telling the whole world he was doing charity. Leo was quiet for a while, and then he asked if his mom knew about the letters. Eddie said he liked to think she did. He said Jenna had been the one who taught him that you show up for the people you love, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, and that every letter he'd written from that cold car had really been him trying to be the kind of father she'd have wanted their son to have. Leo took his dad's hand then, on his own, for the first time since he'd come home, and they stood there together until the cold ran them off, a father and a son and a mother, all three of them finally on the same side of the truth. Greg Tanner's life came apart the way things do when the truth finally gets air. He answered for the insurance money he drained, and the court he'd lied to, and the town that had seen a generous couple taking in an abandoned child now saw the other thing, the thing that had been underneath, and the same people who had quietly judged Eddie, the mutual friends who had shaken their heads and said, "What kind of father signs his kid away?" The relatives who had stopped returning his calls. All of them learned at once what he had actually done, that he had made an impossible choice to protect his son, and then spent a year of Sundays proving he'd never stopped being that boy's father. Some of them came to him, awkward and ashamed, and said they were sorry, that they should have known him better than to believe it. Eddie was gracious about it, mostly because he was tired of being angry and because he understood the thing they were really apologizing for, which was how fast the world had been willing to believe the worst about a man who'd fallen on hard times. A line cook who slept in his car was easy to write off. It turned out he was also the only person in the whole story who had never once stopped showing up. Marcy did not go back to him. She had lost the marriage and the boy both, and she had known she would when she picked up that shoebox, and she'd done it anyway, which is the only kind of courage that actually costs something. A few months on, with everyone's careful blessing, she asked Eddie if she might still see Leo sometimes. Not as a mother, she said quickly, just as someone who loved him. And Eddie, who understood better than anyone that a child cannot have too many people who genuinely show up, said yes. She had done a wrong and then done the hardest right, and Leo had been loved in that house too, even if it had been love built on a lie, and Eddie was not the kind of man to burn down every bridge just because he'd finally won. The letters did not stop, which surprised even Eddie. One Sunday, months after Leo came home, the boy asked why his dad didn't write him letters anymore, and Eddie said gently that he didn't need to, because now he got to say goodnight in person every single night. Leo thought about that, and then he said he wanted to keep them going anyway. So they did. Every Sunday the two of them sat at the kitchen table and each wrote the other a letter. Silly ones mostly, full of dog cartoons and jokes. And they traded them across the table and read them right there, 3 feet apart. And it became the thing that Sunday meant in that house. A boy who had once been told his father never wrote him, now had a father who wrote him every week and was there to hand it over. Eddie kept those two, the new ones, in a second box next to the first, and sometimes late at night he would look at the 2 boxes side by side, the year of letters that never arrived, and the years of letters that never had to travel more than the width of a kitchen table. and he understood that the second box only existed because a frightened woman had refused to burn the first. On the wall of the small blue room, the 52 letters still hang, 1 through 52, and some mornings, Eddie stands in the doorway and looks at them and thinks about how close it came, how a lock and a lie had almost turned a whole year of a father's love into proof that he'd walked away. How ready everyone had been to believe that the man with the smaller apartment must be the smaller father, that a drowning man who reached for a hand had somehow, in the reaching, given up the right to ever be missed, and how, in the end, the entire distance between losing his son forever and holding him again had come down to something no bigger than a shoebox, and one frightened woman who could not make herself strike a match, but a father who keeps writing never actually left. Somebody just made sure the letters never arrived. 52 Sundays, from the front seat of a car, and then from a second kitchen job, and then from a small blue room, waiting to be filled, a man wrote his son the same true thing over and over, and a lock and a lie stood between the boy and the truth for a year. And then one woman couldn't strike the match, and the truth got out, the way it eventually does. Leo Dolan grew up knowing his father had fought a whole year to come back for him, with nothing, against people who had everything, and won. And that is a thing worth more than a yard, and more than a nicer house, and more than anything a guardian could ever drain from an account. It is worth knowing, for the rest of your life, exactly whose you are. Years later, when Leo was grown, the story he would tell was never about the courtroom, or the lie, or the man who took the money. It was about a shoebox and 52 Sundays, and the day he opened the first letter and understood that the whole time he thought he'd been forgotten, his father had been 3 miles and 1 locked mailbox away, writing to him every single week, refusing to let go of a boy the world had told him to give up on. That is what Leo carried into his own life. Not that he had been abandoned, that he never, for one Sunday of it, actually had been. If this story moved you, send it to the person who kept showing up for you even when they had nothing left to show up with, and tell them you always knew they never really left, and that you saw every letter, even the ones the world tried not to deliver,